All right, everybody, welcome back to the second session of today's conference. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Rachel Frame, member of the RFG committee, conference organizer, so if anyone's had problems in emails, I'm the person on the other end. And I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker of this session on Roman finds from public archaeology projects, Norman Redhead. He retired as the Greater Manchester County Archaeologist in 2021, but has continued his interest in archaeology as the lead archaeologist for the Friends of Castleshaw Roman Forts. It was established in 2014 as part of a successful large-scale community archaeology project. The Friends are a wholly voluntary group who maintain and promote the Roman forts at Castleshaw, as well as undertaking research investigations to further understanding of the site and its hinterland. And today, Norm will be talking to us about two unusual metalwork finds from the recently discovered military annexe at the fort. Norman.
Thank you, Rachel. So I've got two finds which I'm going to show you today, which I'd love your help on because you're the experts, and I'm struggling to find direct parallels for, so you might be able to enlighten me later on. But I'm also going to give a bit of background and context for where those finds came from. And we're lucky enough to have this really nice LiDAR image of the forts, which show them really well in a landscape setting. So you can see, if I get this cursor to it, there's a later fortlet from the early 2nd century, which we partly restored in the 1980s community programme excavation project. And then you could just see the outline of the standard playing card shape for the earlier AD 70s fort, in theory established by Agricola. But the area we're going to look at today, where these finds came from, is a recently discovered annexe attached to the east side of the fort. And you can see the fort guards the main highway. This is the York to Chester road. It's a really important road in the late 1st century. And climbing up to cross the narrowest point of the Pennines, you can see the road also going down further down the valley where it survives as a really nice earthwork. That works. So just a little bit of background on the site itself. So we've got two forts, as I mentioned. The first one is only in use for about 2 decades, but it's got 2 clear phases of timber buildings. Never gets out the turf and timber phase. The fortlet comes along about 10 years later, established when the site's reoccupied around AD 105. That in turn is only in use for a couple of decades, and again has 2 clear phases of timber buildings. So you've got 4 phases over a 40-year period, and then it's abandoned in the mid-120s, which makes it an interesting site for research purposes. A rare example of fort and fortlet on the same site. It became a scheduled monument in 1935. And it's had lots of antiquarian investigations and some more modern excavations as well. Later to which, of course, is the work being done by the Friends. You can see on the right there, the fort lies fairly close to Slack at Huddersfield. It's only 8 miles further on, whereas Manchester is 16 miles going southwest. So I think that made the fort at Castleshaw expendable. And in terms of its topography, it's on the west-facing slopes of Pennines. It's got 2 reservoirs next to it. It's between, it's just off the A62 between Marsden and Delph. And you've got Oldham to the west, Huddersfield to the right. And this just shows you that road climbing up to the top of the Pennines there, which we'll come back to later. So our interest in the area we're working on at the moment was triggered by our community dig in 2014, which consisted of reopening old excavation trenches. That was Ross's Trench from the 50s, Thompson's Trench from the early 60s, Bruton's Trench from 1908 when he reopened the East Gate, and this one by an unknown antiquarian. So we just wanted to establish what was going on this east side of the fort. There's a rampart there, because peculiarly there was no evidence for a defensive ditch on that side, which puts Castleshaw into a really small group of Roman forts where you don't have a ditch along one side of the rampart. So why was that? So we started investigating this area to try and work that out. And this was part of our hinterland project. So we had all that enthusiasm from the successful lottery dig. So how did we take that forward? Well, we started investigating the areas around the forts and also some medieval archaeology in the lower valley. But I'm going to focus just on this area where these cars are. So each season we dig for about 20 days through the summer, so all volunteers. So last summer we had 37 volunteers taking part and excavated 12 trenches and 14 test pits. So the tripod there sits on top of the east rampart of the fort. That's East Gate, and you have the road coming out the East Gate there, and this is the north side of the Vicus. That illustrates there. You can see where our trenches are lined up with this road coming out of the East Gate to rejoin the Roman highway. And what we've established over the last couple of years is the terminus of the fort ditch. It comes around the side. So we've got 67 metres there where there is no ditch alongside the fort, which suggests the commander is in charge of what's going on in the annexe, which makes it a military annexe. As you can imagine, we've done lots of geophysics, lots of blank areas. In here, for instance, which reflects the fact there was a farmstead here in the post-medieval period. I think they cleared a lot of the land at that time. And you can just see a shadow of another old excavation trench there. But we've managed to establish the defences for the annexe, which are quite slight because they're being truncated both by slighting by the Romans but also by agriculture and land clearance. So what looked like meaningful anomalies on geophysics actually, in many cases, turned out to be bedrock outcropping near the surface, annoyingly, which is what these red areas are. For the south side of the annexe then, we had not much archaeology surviving at all. And the southern defences just run along here. And that's the road coming out North Gate, and then it gets removed from there onwards. But the archaeology divides in two. The north side of the annexe produced really interesting archaeology with two main phases. So we had a path coming, or trackway coming from the East Gate to access this stone platform, about 12 metres by 2 metres wide. And that gave access to a whole series of ovens and halves, some of which you can see here. There's half there. There's these charcoaly areas, which were clay ovens, some of them probably screened by these patterns of state holes. And underlying that, in the earlier phase, we've started getting evidence for post holes and beam slots. And that's the edge of the stone platform. In the northwest corner of the annexe, there's another of these ovens built right into the annexe rampart here, which runs up to the fort ditch, so we establish that relationship. And these remains very truncated, so you've only got 25 centimetres surviving this rampart, which is why it was never picked up previously. So we've got a variety of halves. This slide really on the left shows the key relationships. So you've got the second phase half, all within the fort phases in the late 1st century. And that's lying on top of this thick yellow clay layer, which is put in when they demolished the first phase timber buildings, which this deposit is associated with lower down, to level the ground ready for putting these halves and ovens on. See another one there, which covers an earlier construction trench. And this half here overlies earlier deposits, a nice large Roman nail coming out, sealed by that half. And last year, we also had evidence, paleo-environmental evidence, with charred barley and spelt wheat coming out from one of these halves. And from one of the kilns that we found as well. So in 2024, we found, unexpectedly, this stone-walled kiln surviving. It survived because Bruton's Trench ran through here, but the kiln was actually set into the ground. It was a subterranean feature, otherwise it would have been damaged, like the adjacent stone oven. There's only one stone from the floor of that oven surviving. It's been cut through by the old trench. But we're starting to get evidence for intensive cooking activity and food processing. And then last year we found a second kiln, but in 2024, we had evidence, although we didn't get any charred grains, which we did get last year for the second kiln. The first kiln, 2024, our evidence was in the terms of this quite interesting lead find that came out on the side of the kiln. So this is a lead weight, and it's carefully laid on the ledge at the side of the kiln. Interestingly, it weighs 1.2 kilograms, but the shape is interesting. So you can see it's been clipped on one side, probably made in a mould, and then we think they might have clipped it to make it to the correct weight. You can see the disc shape there in profile. And you've got good eyesight, you might be able to see a slightly raised M there. So the thinking is that stands for modius, which was the Roman measurement for grain. And it's an odd weight, and I can't find any parallels for this weight at the moment. Of course, you do get a lot of Roman lead weights, but I can't find a direct parallel for this. The actual weight is a bit odd as well. Maybe it's roughly a sixth of a full modius. So presumably this being used to weigh out measurements of grain for the troops or for the cooking activities or for commercial purposes. It may also have been used to make sure that the grain had dried sufficiently to, as an indication that they got the temperature right. And it's been carefully laid at the side of the kiln. So I just wonder if it's part of a careful closure ceremony at the end of the life of the kiln to appease the gods. And I was pleased to get some advice from Professor Damon Robinson on this. But I'd dearly love to find some parallels. If anyone can suggest any for me, that would be great. As I say there. Okay, so moving on to the second object. So this is going back to last year's excavations, where we found the second kiln, as I say, which is there on the right. We also found another stone oven, presumably for baking bread. Again, partly cut through by Bruton's old trench there, but we've got most of it. And then we focus on that first phase of activity, where we're getting evidence from a lot of construction trenches, post-in-trench construction, but also beam slots as well. Sealed, as I say, by that second phase clay layer. This slide on the left indicates the type of archaeology evidence we're getting for those timber buildings. So the southern wall of the buildings were vetted, cut into this clay to terrace the floor of the building. And we've got a corner post here associated with a slot here, which would have had a short length of sill beam. And this is an internal beam slot coming to meet that. And then the orange arrows are showing the ghosts of upright timbers, which would have been set into that sill beam. And then last year, we just continued finding more and more of these slots with post-in-trench construction. I'm sure you're going to gasp at the quality of the finds we're getting from the site. This is about as good as it gets, unfortunately. Almost. This is a typical assemblage for Castleshaw. We've got terribly acidic soil, so even the scraps of salmonware we get rubs off on your fingers. Ironwork mostly is unrecognisable, but we do get a number of nails. We get a lot of daub, some of it burnt from the heat, and we get a variety of courseware pots. The orange wares are in terrible condition, as you can see, and quite fragmentary. And we get some slipwares and some colour-coated pottery as well. And some calcined bone, especially with those clay ovens, which suggest they were roasting meat. Some of our better ones from last year. Amphora sherds. We've had previously Dressel 20 type amphora, and some cream bowls, and most common form are these greyware cooking pots. And last year we also found the base of a mortarium. But coming on to second unusual find. So this was investigating more of these foundations for timber buildings. That's the south wall, which I've already mentioned. Post-entrenched construction, an internal wall perhaps, but certainly these beam slots are internal and they're running parallel. And when we removed the fill of those, we found 2 pieces of ironwork set quite deeply into the ground. One was hollow, as you can see, the other was more a spike. And we're puzzling because these would have been under a timber beam, a sill beam, and weren't quite sure what's going on. And then we found another one in exactly opposite the other parallel slot. Not the most endearing artefacts, but what are they? So they come in pairs. So this one's not as big as that first one we found, and not as well shaped. But you seem to have this spiked iron object next to this larger one. Now that is hollow. That bulbous end is hollow, and then projecting from it is a sort of square shaft here, which is obviously decayed and broken off, and then a more pointed spike at that end. So current thinking is, are they something to secure the sill beams in place? Or are we looking perhaps at a pintle where you've got the iron going through the beam for a door, for a threshold into the... If you come across anything like this, please let me know, because we're really struggling at the moment. And just finish, we were delighted to find as well, typical archaeology, penultimate day of the dig, we came across these Roman timbers, quite deep down, sealed under this thick deposit of clay. So we covered those back up. We're going to go back to those, because we don't normally get timbers there because of these acidic soil conditions. But the clay had created anaerobic conditions. We've got a sill beam with possible planks going up to it. Could it be a floor? Could it be a collapsed ceiling? Could it be a collapsed wall? Sealed by this stone layer. So we're going to go back to that, probably next year rather than this year when we've got the resources. So just reflect, this is the first phase of timber construction, mapped out, joining up the dots. Possibly we're looking at a small granary here. This could be a supply depot in the first phases of campaigning in the AD 70s in the Pennines. That's where the in situ timbers come from. And then the second phase, got this intensive cooking and food preparation activity. And there's some suggestion of zonation here. So you can see there's a bit of a band of ovens running through there, halves in orange, and then a discrete area here for our 2 kilns and our 2 stone ovens. The interpretation for that second phase is the equivalent of an M62 service station. So people are going there with their wagons and they're hitching up any extra animals in this southern part of the annexe where we don't have a lot of our archaeology. So that could be a wagon park, animal corral, storage. And then they've got to get to the top of the Pennines. That is a really steep ascent there. While they're hitching up those animals, come and get your pizza or your bread, some wine, maybe beer. Looking at possible multi-functions for the kilns, maybe they're using those for drying purposes, for malt, for beer making. So we'll be up there again in August. You're welcome to come and visit. Have a look at our website if you want to find details of that in due course. And we're all volunteers. It's been a great community project, and thanks to all these guys who've actually made it possible. And on our website, you can find all our reports, publications, and a dig diary if you want to delve into it in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Norman. We've got a couple of minutes for questions or suggestions on the mystery objects, if anyone has any. Yes.
I might be able to help with your planet convex lead object. I've recorded a couple of similar things from like first century context in London. Ours had been chopped up rather more than yours, and so that led me to think they're perhaps ingots rather than weights.
Right.
And you do get, not so much in leather, I think off the top of my head, but you do get planet convex copper ingots, some which are stamped from southern Scotland and areas like that. So I wonder if it's your M is an equivalent thing where someone's scratched a letter in a like sand casting space for casting an ingot instead, maybe.
Yeah.
Just
That's
repeat
great.
the question for the recording.
So you've got possible parallel examples from your excavations in London where you think they're ingots which have been marked with an M. Did you have? No.
Sadly not.
No. Okay.
No, they're about the same shape and size,
Right.
but some of them have been chopped completely in half.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. I'll be really pleased to see those examples if you could send them to me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Just a comment, that's all I was really interested. Just a comment that there's a fort in the Neath Valley at Colwyn, which has an annex very similar to yours. It was only been done once by Ward in 1910, and nothing has been done much with it. But the annex itself and the shape, and did the land fall away a little bit?
It does, quite steeply.
Yeah, and Colwyn is like that.
Yeah, okay. So this is a Roman fort in the Neath Valley, which has a similar site annex. But the problem I'm finding, as you mentioned there, it was dug in 1910, the very few annexes that have been looked at in detail internally. Antiquarians tend to establish the defences. Elginhof in Scotland is probably the best case study for me to work with, because that was fully excavated. In fact, they found a substantial annex there with similar activities going on to Castleshaw. But I'm struggling otherwise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to our next move. Thank you very much again. Yeah.